Hello everyone! Today I'm doing a different video for you, and one that is hopefully going to be a series here on my channel. I had taken a poll quite a few months back to see if you would be interested in seeing me rewatch old Disney classic animated movies that I haven't seen in a while, or just rewatch them to refresh my memory and kind of sit down and give you my thoughts on them. I thought it would be kind of fun because I love Disney. Gives me an excuse to go back and watch the movies because I don't get that much spare time to just sit down and watch them, so this kind of forces me to in a good way. Also to kind of see my thoughts on them now as an adult versus when I watched them when I was younger as a kid. I don't think it will be very realistic to try to do this every single month, but I'm going to try to do as many of them as I can for you as often as I can. But after writing down all of the movies, there are many more than I expected, because I'm not going to just do the Disney princess movies. Well, that would be fun. I also want to revisit some older ones that aren't princess. So I'm going to try to go in order of when they were released, but there are a lot on there, so I don't know if it's possible for me to do every single one, but I'll at least try to do the majority of the popular ones. Then, of course, as you know, Disney's been remaking all of them in live action. I've only seen a couple of the live action, and the ones I did see I enjoyed, but I haven't seen a lot of the newer ones that have come out because I haven't really been that excited about them. But when I get to certain movies, if they do have a live action equivalent, let me know if you'd like to see me either compare them or talk about the animated one, and then in a separate video talk about the live action one and compare them there. So let me know your thoughts on that. But today, you may have guessed by my appearance, we're going to be talking about Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, because that was the first one that was released in 1937. It was the first of the Disney animated feature-length movies. And it was a very different time in 1937, but I did my best to look as close to Snow White as I could get with what I had to work with. So I will try to do that for the princess ones as best I can to kind of get in the character and the theme of the movie. But others might be a little bit more of a challenge for me, but I just thought it would be kind of a fun excuse for me to, in a very small way, Disney bound, which I've never done but have always wanted to do, so I can do it in a small way in these videos for you. Now, I did make some notes because I knew that while watching the movie I would not be able to remember everything that I wanted to say if I did not make notes, so this is just to help me remember what I wanted to tell you. But right off the bat, I had forgotten that the older Disney movies started out with very long introductions. They did all of their credits at the beginning of the movie, and not in the way movies do now where they kind of put it over the video and the story beginning, but rather they just had the text and nothing else. And that was rather long, or it felt long. And then I believe they did this in a lot of the earlier movies, but we'll see when we get to the next ones. But it started out with a book opening, of course, Once Upon a Time, and them kind of going through the introduction, through the pages of the book briefly. So that was something else that I had forgotten. I did think it was nice, though, in those opening credits that Walt Disney wrote a thank you to his staff who worked on the movie, because you don't see that a lot nowadays, and I think it just is another example of what a great guy Disney was and how he cared for his employees. Since it's been a very long time, I couldn't tell you exactly when I last watched Snow White, but it has been many years, and I did not remember a lot of the scenes. I obviously remembered the overall general story and characters because it's one of those timeless ones that gets talked about over and over, but I didn't remember a lot of the details and scenes that went on. For one, the fact that in the beginning she's forced to wear rags and clean by the evil queen, most likely in order to make her appear less attractive, since we all know the queen wants to be the fairest of them all. And I think because of this and because of the queen making her do these things, she seemed to me to be very domesticated for a princess. And I'll keep going back to this, but I understand the movie was made in 1937, a very different time, but even so, I found Snow White as a character to be very naive and too trusting. And before I get more into her character and her story, I did want to touch on the songs in the movie. So the movie was nominated for an Oscar for Best Musical Score. And so some of the songs that I noted were I'm Wishing, where she's singing into the wishing well and it echoes back to her. One Song, Smile and a Song. And then some of the ones that I felt were better known were Whistle While You Work and Hi Ho. And then Someday My Prince Will Come is such a classic fairy tale princess song. But overall, I noticed the songs were pretty short. Snow White has a very high falsetto voice, which sometimes could come across, I hate to say it, but a little shrill and harsh just because it was so high and kind of that sugary, sweet princess voice. And I have to say that it's not my favorite soundtrack from a Disney movie, but there are a few good ones that I do enjoy, especially the Whistle While You Work. So getting back to the character of Snow White, one line that she says that I found to be quite old-fashioned is she says, "I'm so ashamed. The fuss I made because I was afraid." And she's blaming herself for something she really shouldn't. She's also been taught to not inconvenience anyone, but she can talk to the animals and just comes across to me as being very sweet and innocent. Now she is, I believe, the youngest of the princesses. She's supposed to be 14 when the movie takes place, so I can understand a 14-year-old being somewhat young and naive and impressionable, so that does make sense. However, for some reason, when I think of princesses and animals, I tend to think of Cinderella or maybe even Sleeping Beauty, but Snow White did not come to mind as being with the animals for some reason, so I didn't remember the fact that she was so close with the animals. And a scene that kind of surprised me that I didn't remember is the animals even help her clean, which again I thought was more of a Cinderella thing, but I apparently had just forgotten about it. So one thing that I had remembered incorrectly was when the huntsman lets her go, I always had it in my head that he brings a deer heart back to the queen, but it was actually a pig's heart, which I had not remembered it that way. Another point that I thought was a little bit interesting and somewhat funny is that when the dwarfs come home and their home has been completely cleaned by Snow White, they are afraid because of somebody having been in their house, but they are afraid because they think that it's a monster or something. Wouldn't that be a good problem to have, a cleaning monster? I also found it interesting and wonder if it was done to, well, I don't know the reasons why it would have been done, but I did think it was interesting because I never remembered this part, and it's just interesting that it tied into other Disney things. But when the dwarfs are kind of surprised or not sure about something, their go-to saying is Jiminy Cricket. So, thought that was kind of a funny one. The dwarf scenes especially, I had forgotten a lot of them. So for instance, Snow White makes the dwarfs learn manners. Apparently they were never ones to wash up and clean themselves, so she teaches them to wash their hands before dinner, which leads me into the song where they are washing up. They sing a song about scrubbing and all of that, and I had completely forgotten about that song until I saw it again. They also have a yodeling song that they do for her, which I had completely gone out of my head. One thing that I did stop and think about is the fact that the dwarfs are grown men. I mean, here they go work in the mines, they're grown adult men, but she kind of treats them like children. Then again, maybe they need a little bit of that since they don't even wash their hands. Now again, pointing out it was 1937, and I'm sure Snow White was probably very advanced for that time, but I did notice that sometimes when they would go to a wide shot of Snow White, that the animation of her was not very detailed, or they didn't have a lot of detail in her face when they would go out to wider shots of her. I did think it was kind of cute and sweet, but also plays into her naive character when she's praying. She's standing at the side of her bed, or the dwarf's bed, praying, and she says, "Please make Grumpy like me." So that's what she's praying for Grumpy to like her. And he does eventually end up warming up to her, even if he doesn't want to fully admit it. Now, getting into talking about some of the other characters, the magic mirror does not play as big a role as I remembered. I remembered the mirror being in the movie a lot more and playing a bigger role, but I must be thinking of other Snow White movies where he had a more significant role, because he really didn't have that big of one in this, which I thought he did. Also, I think that the famous line that everybody thinks of from that movie is often misquoted, and I think I've even been guilty of it myself. So the correct way to say it is, "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of all?" And I think it's often misquoted as "Mirror, mirror on the wall," and I think people add "who is the fairest of them all." But the correct line that I took down directly from the movie was, "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of all?" Another major example of Snow White being naive and too trusting is when the dwarfs go to work. Both Doc and Grumpy warn her to beware of strangers because they know that the evil queen is going to be after her in some way. And she listens to them, takes their advice, says that she won't, all that sort of stuff. But when the evil queen shows up in her hag form as a disguise, Snow White forgets all about the dwarf's words of caution and goes out to talk to her, even though she's a stranger, and then proceeds to feel sorry for her and invite her inside the house, despite her animal friends cautioning her and warning her, and she thought that they were just being mean to this poor old lady, so she doesn't listen to them and invites her in anyways. Then the queen tells her, "This is a magic wishing apple. One bite and all your dreams come true. And if that's not wishful thinking, I don't know what is." So here Snow White, not only is she inviting in this stranger after the dwarves told her exactly not to do that, she's also taking food from her. Now, a couple things I didn't remember about the queen were her falling off the cliff, but also that there were vultures in the movie. I didn't remember those vultures at all. Now, I think this is one of the shorter Disney animated movies, but some scenes were much longer than I remembered, and some went very quickly, including the end scene where, first off, going to the prince, I knew that he woke her with a kiss, but I did not know that it was First Love's Kiss. I think I mixed it up with Sleeping Beauty and always thought it was True Love's Kiss, but it's First Love's Kiss because he is Snow White's first love. But as soon as she wakes up, the dwarfs are all happy and excited for her to go off with the strange man that she's met once, and she just is not at all surprised that she's been awoken and just leaves with the prince, which I get it's a fairy tale, I get it's fiction, I get it was made a long time ago, but that part just kinda made me take pause for a moment. So my overall thoughts after rewatching Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs were that it is not my favorite of the Disney princess movies, but I think it's a product of the time it was made in, and that could be a big part of it too. I did somewhat emulate Snow White, or maybe emulate's not the right word, but kind of identify with or admire Snow White as a child because she was the fair-skinned princess and I've always been a fair-skinned person. Fun fact for you, I played Snow White in a local theater production as a kid. Now the theater production was based on the Grimm's Fairy Tales version, of course a little bit more of a family-friendly version, but it wasn't based off of Disney's version. But I did play Snow White, and if I'm able to get a clip of that for you, I will share it with you.
Slowly and carefully, Snow White told the dwarf the story of how she had come to be at their house in the woods, and everything the husband had said to her
you enjoyed me revisiting Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It is fun for me to go back and watch and reanalyze these movies that I haven't seen for a while, especially being such a Disney fan. And next up on the list is Pinocchio, which I do not know the last time I've seen that one. It might have only been when I was a young child, so I really don't remember much about it, so that one should be interesting. But let me know down in the comments what you thought of this video, if you liked it, what your favorite Disney movie is, and which one you're most looking forward to me talking about, because I would love to hear what other people enjoy. Thank you so much for watching, and have a magical day.